Alright everyone, I figured I'd make my walk away video, hashtag walk away. It's basically a sub-movement right now of encouraging people to leave the Democratic Party for various reasons. A lot of people, I think they're actually further left and they're leaving it because it's led by someone like Pelosi, who's not actually technically on the left. We gotta understand, a lot of people, if they're like partisan Republicans, they always make the mistake, well, the Democrats are totally far left, they're totally liberal. Well, yeah, they got some Marxist tendencies, that's sure, but, there are a lot of Republicans that are basically 95% the same. What's the difference between John McCain and Hillary Clinton? John McCain is more avowedly and unabashedly pro-war, whereas Hillary Clinton's more like hush-hush about it and then laughs about it afterwards once genocide's been committed, like in Libya. Not a big difference, to be sure. Both a couple of chicken hawks, basically. But I figured I would relate for anyone who doesn't know this. Because I don't know that I've mentioned it in the course of my political analysis in some years, and over 100,000 people I think have probably joined this channel since I last told it. I figured I would talk about basically why I left the Democratic Party, in more depth, because I've mentioned I voted for Obama in 2008. That was the first time that I voted. I wasn't quite old enough to vote for W or John Kerry, but it's like in that election I probably just would have stayed home. Who fucking cares? They're both old, boring, warmonger, basically corporate centrists. Where's the choice? There is none. W happens to be like a foot shorter and a little bit less coherent, and John Kerry is far more boring. Not a big difference. Then they're both boring, ultimately. W is basically an absentee president for the last 2 years. Didn't want to make any appearances because he'd been grown so unpopular. It was like sub 20% approval at certain points. And then I voted for Ron Paul in 2012. You got to understand, I'm not a Republican. I've never joined a party in any official capacity. I've never donated to a political campaign. I thought about it with Ron Paul. Also thought about it with Rand. I backed, honestly, in this last election. My candidate of first choice was Rand Paul. That's the person I wanted to be the standard bearer of the Republican Party. When Rand Paul endorsed Donald Trump, it became possible for me to then vote for him. If he had refused to, if he had become never Trumper, I would have said, well, I trust Rand's instincts and, I like the cut of his jib, basically. Maybe I'll have to think more about this. And when, you got to remember, when Trump chose Mike Pence and Evangelo Khan as his running mate, I wasn't sure that I could stay on board for a brief moment in time. I was like, well, I'll go back to basically the default, which is the Libertarian Party at this point. But then Gary Johnson went nuts, so I was like, everyone else is nuts. At least Trump is sane, essentially, and I don't think he'll start a nuclear war or do something stupid. By the way, I don't believe in the third party is a wasted vote meme, because it is. It's like, vote for a party that's not worth governing is a meme, essentially. Essentially, the Democrats. So I chose to do hashtag walk away around 2010, and the reason may surprise some people, because I've been cast off as like, well, you're on the right, you're a conservative, or whatever, you're an extremist because you believe in free speech. It's a form of extremism now, I guess, believing the Constitution. What I would say is the reason why I went from voting Obama in 2008 to within the first couple of years really being like, I had considered myself vaguely to be a liberal, kind of a Democrat at the time, but then I'm like, fuck this. Obama didn't do any of the things that he was supposed to do. For a voter like me, my primary concern was, hey, the economy is collapsing and I'm about to enter college. Not great, but really it was the Iraq War, government surveillance, things like that. Obama expanded the surveillance apparatus. He at least temporarily expanded the scope of operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. He never got us out of either of those conflicts. We're still there to this day. They've been scaled back, especially in Iraq now, because some stability was achieved. The goal of ridding the area of ISIS predominantly has worked. It's still a concern. It still exists, but it's better as a rule than it was before for some years. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, we've actually added more troops, which I'm not happy about. I would just leave the situation entirely and say, hey, the Afghan government, you're a sovereign nation. I would be willing to pay reparations for infrastructure damage that our military did over time. But ultimately, it's not our battle. We can send in contractors. You can hire mercenaries, certainly, if you want to. We can have an advisory position, but we're not going to fight your battle for you. You've got to do that on your own. Maybe you'd think about just slaughtering the Taliban wholesale and see what happens. Maybe it would be better. Of course, you get a problem with different tribes not really wanting to be near each other in a national capacity. But Obama, he wasn't anti-war. See, people saying, well, he was some remarkable progressive, like he was the first gay president or something. No, all he did was back off of defending DOMA. And it's like, I supported gay marriage before the Obama era, had no problem. It's like, there's one thing Bush, irked me on, because he's like, well, traditional marriage, we need a Defensive Marriage Act. It's like, bullshit. No, we don't. We don't need any such thing. It's a government contract. We're not talking about invading the church or something. He was never on the forefront of actual moral progress, or social progress, I should say. He wasn't really a liberal in even really the fiscal sense. He raised taxes, the health insurance mandate. But that was just corporate health care. I oppose the ACA totally. I think it should be entirely ripped apart and replaced with the system we were using. Seemed to work fine to me. Yeah, every system has its quirks, but just the fact that something is broken doesn't mean that, hitting it with a hammer is going to fix it. Yeah, maybe a little bit, but another chunk might fall off. Who knows? The reason that I chose to walk away from the Democratic Party really, though, ultimately is because the Democrats walked away from me. Look, the position of the left in general, the young left, in the mid-2000s, we're talking the Bush era, pro-free speech, end government surveillance, no more proxy wars, that's bullshit, we need accountability, we need a government that at least appears to give a damn about the situation. Because currently, under Bush, we didn't. The Democratic Party, once it actually got control, though, within a few years it was evident they weren't going to do any of those things. They kept the surveillance up. They kept the warmongering up. They kept the censorship bullshit up, the moral haranguing, the hand-wringing. They were willing to work with Republicans and could pass something unanimously if it was a shitty idea, but if it was a good idea, it got bogged down in committee and never went anywhere. Gitmo never closed. It's still open, I believe, to this day. Well, that's funny. That was one of his main campaign promises. I will close Guantanamo. Hey, Mr. President, when are you going to get around to that? Oh, I don't know. 20,000 years from now, maybe? It's dumb. Obama did a few things that were okay, and the Democrats at the time as well. The Cuban embargo ending was a good thing. Obama didn't get in the way of our oil boom. I thought that was good, although on that, if he had actually crowed about that, a lot of his own fans would have cried foul, because they'd be like, you sound like a far-right Republican. You want to poison the whales with natural gas drilling or something. They would have said something like that. But the Democrats that had been, when they were an outside movement, anti-surveillance and anti-opaque government and pro-transparency and pro-peace, they've entirely flipped during the Obama era. And then they had the audacity to call people like me racist for daring to criticize Obama with the same criticisms we were levying against Bush. That's what the Democratic Party did. Now they've made their bed, now they have to lay in it. They oversaw years and years of fiscal crisis and endless warmongering. It was ridiculous. It was totally ridiculous. They should have known better. And now they've suffered. Now, as a result of their mishandling of the economy and of foreign policy especially, Trump is in charge. And I voted for Donald Trump. I chose to walk away from the Democrats. Now, I'm not a straight ballot, I'm going to vote nonstop Republicans. I'm not a Republican. I never will be a Republican. As long as people like Pat Robertson and Rick Santorum exist, I can never join and support fully the Republican Party. But there are some Republicans with sense. I still like Rand Paul and his dad, Ron Paul, and probably everyone else in their family. They seem down-to-earth people. Like an actual, average American family that has become rich because so many of them have been in Congress now. Trump. He's a multi-billionaire business Democrat. He's one of the few sane Democrats left, and he is basically. He has an R after his name. That's the party. As far as his ideology goes, he's not some holy warrior. Oh, I'm a holy roller now, says Donald Trump, and I own 10 machine guns. No, that's not him. No, absolutely. He's a Manhattan penthouse dweller, sort of like Bloomberg in that capacity. If Bloomberg had more money and more IQ points, he could pass for Donald Trump. But you're never going to hear that from the media. They'd rather cast him off as like a far-right Nazi or something, which is totally ridiculous as well. The Democrats, I choose to keep walking away from them because they keep walking in a very leftward direction. And it's really ridiculous because it's not going to work. It's bad as a campaign strategy. They've gone way out in left field and they've convinced themselves that if they talk about socialism, somehow that's going to win them elections. Okay, maybe in New York City, maybe in California, not nationwide. It's never going to happen. The country is beginning to move in the opposite direction. They've lost. Their final issue was immigration and they lost on it. It's now marching through July. In August, there's no campaigning for a lot of those critical seats that the Democrats can do because 6 of those positions they're going to have no August recess in the Senate. So the Democrats have made their bed and they have to lay in it. The walk-away thing, I saw some people yesterday trying in vain to defend the left. They're like, oh, walk-away hashtag is being spread by bots. And I'm like, hey, I've got 250,000 subscribers on YouTube. Go ahead and call me a bot. My fans know better. And I'm like, I'm basically part of this. It's just that I'm not walking away now. I walked away, back in 2010. I had to. The Democratic Party began to shift towards corporatism, towards establishmentarian sort of authoritarianism, and towards far leftism and a high tax model, and it still is right now. It still hasn't learned its lesson. This is why I think Trump probably wins a second term, and I'm not alone in thinking that. You look at the keys to the White House, dude. I'm sure that by 2020, Trump will probably have sealed the deal in his estimation too. Be funny to see what Scott Adams says. A lot of people just knew him as the cartoonist for Dilbert, and of course, he was better on the election, along with Molyneux and Cernovich and some others, than people that they make 7 figures a year specifically to be political analysts. Like a Nate Silver. He makes money hand over fist. He has the penthouse and the tequila shots and stuff. He didn't know what was going on. He doesn't know. The Democratic Party almost walked away from me more than I walked away from the Democratic Party. I would still consider voting for them, but they've got to become worth voting for. Give me a candidate that's actually worth casting a ballot for. Maybe you can get my vote. But right now, I'm looking at the Democrats. I'm not really seeing much. There's really not a lot there. They're talking about, Kamala Harris for president 22. Joe Biden. Haven't you tried this before? Are you nuts? You're going to get stomped into a mud patch by Trump if you try to put Biden or Clinton or Bernie Sanders against it. Bernie Sanders isn't going to run. He probably won't even be alive by 2020. The dude's in his mid-70s already. He'd be almost 80 by that point. Do you think that an 80-year-old man is capable of campaigning very hard? No, when a politician is that old, it's because they no longer really have to campaign because they're a perpetual fixture of Congress. Or some Supreme Court justice who doesn't have to campaign at all. They can sit there and be demented. Nobody can get rid of them. Takes an inordinate effort to get rid of them. It never happens. Haven't there only ever been 2 SCOTUS justices ever actually removed from that position in the history of the United States or something? It's some insanely tiny number. The number of people that get impeached from their office is surprisingly low considering the number of crimes that are committed in D.C. every single day. Mostly they resign so they can keep their pension. That's really what it's about to say. Basically, get out of our way. Yeah, you broke the law. We'll forgive and forget, but you got to get out of office because you become a political liability. So fucking resign. It's basically, it's like Anthony Weiner. Doesn't he still technically, I think, get his pension and stuff? It'd be hilarious. That's about all. Peace out.